Welcome to the Psychedelic Paradigm Shift, where we explore the frontiers of psychedelic science. Journey with us as we interview leading experts, pioneering researchers, and courageous spiritual warriors whose lives have been transformed by the power of psychedelic medicine.
Hi there, welcome to the show. I'm your host, Jeannie Page, and today I'm honored to welcome Kemmi Sadler, who I'm going to call International Badass. That's the unofficial bio. More officially, she's a retired U.S. diplomat and supervisory special agent with the State Department's Diplomatic Security Service. Over a span of 26 years in law enforcement and international security, Kemmi served in some of the world's highest threat environments, including Iraq, Afghanistan, Uganda, Mexico, and El Salvador, after becoming her career as a police officer in St. Augustine, Florida. Today, Kemmi is the founder of Legalize the Divine, advocating for religious freedom and safe legal access to nature-based healing traditions. She's also the founder of the forthcoming memoir, From the Badge to the Vine, Journey Through Duty, Trauma, and Healing. Welcome, Kemmi.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Yes, I'm so happy to talk with you. I will just say full disclosure for our viewers that I have had the privilege of reading your whole book, which I'm going to put up towards the end. So I'm going to pretend I don't know a lot so that I can be sure to ask their questions. But I will say your journey has been a crazy, winding, awesome, surprising, serendipitous, at times crazy and dangerous journey. So I want to hear first, tell us, how did you get into law enforcement to begin with?
At the suggestion of my father, when I was in high school and trying to figure out, what I was going to do after high school, I initially thought that I might go into nursing. I did some volunteer work at the local hospital and quickly realized that probably wasn't going to be a super good fit for me. I was talking to my dad, and he just kind of said offhand, "Have you ever thought about going into law enforcement?" And it was one of those things when he said it, I just was like, oh, yeah, I think that's what I'm going to do. So I went to college, got a degree in criminal justice, and then I moved to Alaska. Anchorage, Alaska is where I first started looking for jobs in the field, initially at a halfway house and a homeless shelter for teenagers. Also worked at a drug and alcohol rehab center there in a kind of security role. And then I moved to Florida because Alaska was too cold for me.
Went from one extreme to the other.
Yeah, I really did. Yeah. Loved Alaska. It's a beautiful, beautiful state. Lots of stuff to do for somebody who's outdoorsy like me, but the winters were too brutal. So I moved to Florida and I got a job as a 911 operator in St. Augustine with the St. Augustine Police Department. And I did that while I put myself through the police academy because Florida's, I assume it's the same now, you have to have a state certification to then apply to become a police officer. You do the academy first and you do that on your own. So I went through the police academy while I worked dispatch, and then I went on the road with St. Augustine in 1998. I worked there until 2001, right after 9/11. I went to Kuwait, working for Department of Defense for a couple of years as a contract security police. And that's where I learned about diplomatic security service.
Was that trip to Kuwait your first trip abroad?
I had been to Canada and the Bahamas.
Oh my God. So, most people start a little more gently with London, Europe. You went straight for the war zone. Oh my gosh. Well, that must have really informed who you are. I'm curious, so to have started as a 911 operator, obviously that's incredibly high stress. I know a lot of people quit that job because it's burnout. Were you kind of drawn to that being under pressure, problem solving under crisis type of person?
I don't know that, I guess, but I don't know that I ever looked at it like that it was something I was drawn to. I seem to have a ability to kind of stay calm under pressure. Some of that I'm sure I developed during those years that I worked for St. Augustine. It was something that served me well in my career as a federal agent. Yeah, it takes a toll on you after the fact, but I think in the moment somehow I was able to usually keep my composure.
Yeah, and I know you're passionate about helping first responders. When you think about all the trauma that first responders deal with on a daily basis, and we never think about it, right? You deal with it, you take it in, you shove it down on the next one, and no one realizes that that's actually taking a toll.
Yeah, for sure. It builds every one of those incidents, those, critical incidents, and even if it's not trauma that happens to you, direct witnessing that, and depending on what kind of things from your own personal life you're bringing to that scene, think about an officer that's had lost a child, even to SIDS or, whatever situations have happened in their life, and then they're responding to a scene where that's happening, and it's like being traumatized all over.
Right. It comes out automatically without people even realizing that those triggers are there. So you got to Kuwait. What happened next?
So I spent about 2 years in Kuwait working there, and while I was there, I knew someone that went to the security briefings at the U.S. Embassy, and he just happened to mention to me, have you ever looked into this diplomatic security service? Seems like something you would like. It's travel and law enforcement. And I looked it up, and DS had the opening for the position was open for like another, I don't know, maybe 2 weeks. And I scrambled to get everything in. It was a lot. This was back before everything was at your fingertips. It was a lot of digging to try and get all the information, all the addresses I'd lived, the dates I'd been there, phone numbers, contacts, to get all that together while living overseas, and got it in by the deadline, and then got a conditional offer of employment and started with DS in January of 2004.
Yes, being Department of State?
Yeah, Diplomatic Security Service is the law enforcement arm of the U.S. State Department.
And is it similar to Foreign Service? Do you have posts for a certain number of years?
Yeah, it's part of the Foreign Service. So the assignments are 1 to 3 years, depending on the threat level, like Iraq and Afghanistan, or 1 year tour, sometimes with possibility to extend, but the longest tours are 3 years. I started in Washington, D.C., then went to Iraq for a year, Uganda for 2, St. Louis for 3, El Salvador for 3, back to D.C. for 2, Afghanistan for 1, Mexico for 3, and then Orlando for 2, and I retired out of Orlando in April of 2024.
Wow. Okay. So I have a few friends in the Foreign Service. So I have an idea of how this works. I know you get to make some choices, right? You get to give like your top 3 choices, and then it's a giant jigsaw puzzle. Which of those places did you actually choose, if any?
Actually, every one of those was, if not my first pick, one of my top 3.
Really? Okay. And why? I mean, these are clearly places that were having conflict.
I wanted to go places that were interesting, where the work was interesting, and
Yeah, so you were drawn to conflict.
yeah, I guess.
Like I said, international badass. God. Which of those places was the scariest?
Probably Iraq, 2006 to 2007 was before we really had an embassy there. The embassy was in Saddam's former palace at that time, and there was a lot of indirect fire coming into the green zone, a lot of explosions in the surrounding green zone that were big enough to rattle the buildings and the ground.
Wow. And you were married at this point?
No, I met my wife in El Salvador in 2014.
Okay. So you didn't have a partner that was worried about you at this time?
No.
Okay. What about your family?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. My mother has been terrified, I think, since I started.
Yeah, I would imagine so. Did you realize when you were standing in Saddam Hussein's palace, the weight of the history of that moment? I mean, it was history. You were living history, but obviously it's become something very controversial. Were you aware of any of that when you were in that?
Yeah, I mean, it definitely felt like being a part of history. I think in the palace, it was a beautiful building. It was kind of a surreal experience because there were these massive, wide hallways, and in some places there'd be cubicles down one side of the hallway, or there was a grand ballroom that had just been divided up into little cubicles where people were working. It was interesting time to be there. Yeah.
Well, and how many times in all of these tours were you in a life and death situation?
I don't know if I had to put a number on it. I mean, places like,
More than one.
it just depends how you define life or death, I guess, you know, and I was close to explosions at least once. It was very close. It was right outside of an office building that I was in.
Wow. Yeah, enough to give you trauma.
Yeah. Enough to leave some marks.
Yes, definitely. Okay. And then you lost a good friend, Amel. Am I saying the name right? Amel. Okay. And tell me that story.
Amel was an Iraqi woman. She worked for the regional security office in Iraq in 2006 while I was there. I was her direct supervisor. She and her husband both worked for the embassy. They were on their second careers. They were an older couple in their 60s, I believe. Very just good people. They could have left Iraq. They'd gotten their kids out of Iraq. But they stayed because they remembered a time, they remembered a different country, and they hoped to be a part of restoring that. And unfortunately, they were running a routine errand. They went to withdraw some bank funds for a friend who was living outside of the country. And when they came out of the bank, they were approached by some young men, and they kidnapped Hazim, and then her husband, yeah, and then they held him for ransom, and they negotiated a ransom from her over the coming weeks. And when she went to pay that, they kidnapped her as well, and they killed them both.
Oh my God, that's awful, Kelly. I'm so sorry. So, and you felt somewhat responsible for that, didn't you? Because were you part of trying to help her?
I did. You know, as her supervisor, I was with her when she was negotiating the ransom. I put her in touch with a group at the embassy that was a team that was working on hostage negotiation type cases to offer her some guidance. Got her accommodations on the embassy compound so that she could try and stay there and get some rest. And the day that she went to meet them, you know, walked her to the gates of the embassy, and after everything unfolded, I kept wishing that I'd tried to stop her or talk her out of it, or, you know, that I could have done something to prevent it. And I know she would have gone no matter what, but I carried a lot of guilt with that for a long time.
Yeah. And that was a lot of your personality, wasn't it? Being a protector of people and feeling like you could save people and stop bad things from happening to them.
Sure, and it's one of the primary responsibilities of diplomatic security service, you know, similar to the Secret Service. One of our primary things that we do is protection and protection details. We have a full-time detail on the Secretary of State visiting foreign dignitaries that come to the U.S., so we do a lot of protection work as agents. And
yeah, that's so hard. And I know you said in your book that she's really the one that taught you about true love.
Yeah, because there was nothing that was going to keep her from going to try to rescue him. And
yeah,
I think that she knew that that was a possible outcome, and I think she was going to go regardless.
Yeah, I think when human beings are in those moments, it's the bravest a human can be. You know, you're walking into the fire for this person you love, and you don't care in that moment because you just want to be with them. And I guess the beautiful spiritual aspect of it is that they are now together. But yeah, heavy for you. So how long did you stay there after that?
That happened, I think, towards the end of my tour. I think I only had maybe a few months left in my assignment after that.
Where did you go next?
Uganda.
Okay. And was this brewing inside of you? Were you having nightmares about that situation?
Yeah, I wasn't sure what was happening. I went to Uganda and I started taking Quinn, which is an anti-malarial. And it's an anti-malarial that's known for having certain side effects.
Oh, no.
Some of which are nightmares and mood swings. So I wasn't sure if what I was experiencing after I left Iraq was a result of the medication that I was taking, or if it was stress residual from that experience. So I stopped taking the methadone for a little while, and it did seem to ease the symptoms a little bit, but I knew that that year had taken a bit of a toll on me, the loss of Amel and just the year of being in a high threat environment like that.
Yeah. And did you have anyone to talk to about it? Did they provide you with mental health support?
I did talk to a counselor one time about it, and this is an area where I think there needs to be more, maybe policy work, if I can say that. When you have a security clearance, it can be a bit of an added stress to seek out counseling, because that's something that comes up for review. Every 5 years, your security clearance, you go through a reinvestigation, and one of the things that they look into is whether or not you're mentally sound. Obviously, that's an important thing for somebody that holds a security clearance. So it's not unwarranted, but it's something that people think about when they're deciding whether or not they want to seek out counseling for something. And it was certainly something that I think deterred me from seeking out counseling more broadly. If it's marriage counseling or grief counseling, then it tends to be not looked on too harshly. So I did talk to someone one time under that umbrella of grief counseling.
What about friends? Did you have good friends that you could talk to?
I mean, I have good friends that I could talk to about anything, but I was half the world away, and it's a process, and have those conversations over the phone with people you haven't seen in a long time, and you call out of the blue, and I don't know, I didn't. I don't think I really talked to anybody out about it for quite a while.
Yeah. I think all that policy situation about, are people freely able to seek out mental health? It all needs to change. I think a lot of those policies harken back to like the 1950s. And I remember when I was first thinking about the Peace Corps, that same concern comes up. And as someone who has had mental health treatment and been on antidepressants, that was a turn for me too. And that's wrong. It shouldn't be. I mean, because we all have trauma, which I think now is more in the dialogue and people are starting to realize. But certainly any kind of first responder, military, any of the stuff that sees really serious stuff, that's trauma. And it's not your fault or the person's fault. So I really do hope that all of these conversations start to lead to change around that. And I feel like it has been changing. I mean, just in the global zeitgeist in general, there's more talk of mental health. And obviously psychedelic therapy is now becoming a thing. But no one should ever feel like they can't talk to somebody about that stuff for fear of their career, because holding it in is going to cause worse things.
Right. And it's one of those things that, could be just messaging, because I think, would that really, and I talked to somebody about that, would have really had impacted my career? I don't know, maybe not, but it was a fear that I had at the time, and it was a fear that I know a lot of my coworkers had as well. So it might just be that there needs to be better messaging that, hey, this is something that's you can talk about with someone and it's not going to negatively impact your...
Yeah, I think it's a valid fear, but I think the change that needs to happen is that your bosses need to be in the position of, okay, you have to be in trauma work for this thing that happened, like losing that friend. Anyone who's trauma informed would recognize that is trauma. It's really that simple, and we don't have a dialogue of trauma in our society. It's been one of my biggest frustrations having done this work. Once you do work with trauma and you understand how it's in the body, and we'll come to that when we talk about your ayahuasca, you walk around and you realize everyone's carrying trauma.
Sure.
Right? Of some kind. And most people are not aware of it, and they're not aware of how everyday, ordinary reactions out in the world can trigger the vestiges of that trauma. I mean, we know the obvious ones, like if somebody comes home from war with PTSD and they get triggered in a bar brawl, or they become a difficult spouse, they're drinking. I mean, those are the obvious signs, but there's a lot more subtle signs too. So you retired in Florida, and what year was that?
2024.
Okay, so recently. And over those years, at what point did you start realizing that you had trauma and that something was wrong? I know you were using alcohol to cope. Is that right?
Yeah, I definitely used alcohol as an escape, I think. I'm not sure that I realized how unhealthy my relationship with alcohol was until, they call hindsight's 2020
Yeah.
for a reason. And I look back on things now and realize things that I maybe didn't realize at the time.
Yeah. And so where did you come into the ayahuasca piece? I believe Joe Rogan had a hand in that.
Yeah, he did. It was probably either late 2020 or maybe early 2021. I was listening to an episode of the Joe Rogan Experience, and he was interviewing Graham Hancock, and they were talking about ayahuasca, and they were speaking about it with such reverence that I became very intrigued, and I wanted to know more about it. I kept rewinding that bit to try and figure out how to spell it and writing it phonetically and trying to search it. It took a few minutes to figure out what exactly it was they were talking about. And that just opened a whole new world. I started ordering books on psychedelics, and because it challenged what I knew to be true, right? I grew up in the era of just say no. I spent my time as a police officer in St. Augustine arresting people for marijuana and crack cocaine and looking for evidence of meth labs in town. And so as I started to research psychedelics, it challenged a lot of the ideas that I'd held. And I amassed this library. I call it my psychedelic library. I have this little bookcase, 2 little shelves. I actually built it out of like scrap lumber, and it's crooked and it's cute. So I have my little psychedelic library. And the more I researched it, the more it just kind of made sense, and I couldn't shake the feeling that, especially with ayahuasca, like I researched all of the psychedelics and I just kept coming back to ayahuasca. I felt very drawn to it, and at some point I decided this was something that I was going to try when I retired, and I was researching places in South America to do that when a friend of my wife's happened to mention that he'd been to a ceremony in South Florida. And I was like, wait a minute, what? And he put me in touch with that church, and I joined that church, Central Spiritualista Luz de Vegetal, based in Florida. They're a branch of a church that's based in Brazil. The headquarters is in Brazil. And I joined that church about 2 years ago, and it's not a journey I ever expected to be on. I don't know. It's kind of crazy.
People would say this is the wisdom of the plants finding you before you found them. I know you've read The Celestial Prophecy.
Yeah.
That book my mom gave it to us all when we graduated from college back in the 90s. And it was kind of my first seed planted on just the magic of synchronicity and actually recognizing the signs and looking for them and realizing once these things happen and you see them, then more starts to happen. The fact that it was your wife's friend who randomly planted, oh, I knew this church in Florida, right? And your wife was not someone that was into psychedelics at all.
No, not at all.
So that's an odd coincidence, don't you think?
Yeah.
Coincidence.
Yeah, and it happened at Disney, which she loves Disney, and she drags me kicking and screaming. And I said, well, it did happen at the most magical place on earth. So
just look at all those things that had to happen for that moment. And I love it because you and I are the same generation. Growing up with, this is your brain on drugs, right? We all remember that ad and Nancy Reagan, just say no. And I actually thought about law enforcement too. I interviewed with the CIA and the FBI back when I was first out of college. So I was kind of on a similar track. When I first learned of ayahuasca, it was in Peru on a yoga retreat. I'd never heard of it either. I mean, we, of course, had heard about LSD. What else? That was really all I'd heard of. And mushrooms, I guess I'd heard of mushrooms, but barely. When I first learned about ayahuasca, I was like, what? And because I came to it from this therapeutic yoga retreat perspective and I was learning from the indigenous people in Peru, I never viewed it as a drug. I knew that it was a spiritual sacrament practice and a way of healing for them that they had used for centuries.
right.
So when I first learned how much we'd been lied to, I was so angry. I just felt like we'd been truly lied to and propagandized about so much of it. And obviously, we don't want to espouse anyone doing the hard drugs that will kill you, heroin, crack cocaine, any of that. But the fact that they got lumped into that same category that's what really upset me. That they were deemed to have no therapeutic value. And now you and I know how much therapeutic value they have.
Yeah, yeah, and I don't know. I'm hopeful that that will change because I think the evidence is pretty clear and that there's a lot of studies coming out and veterans are making great headway in this space and really kind of paving the way. And there's a lot of brave voices out there who are spreading that message. So, you know, I'm hopeful that that message will get out, that it's not the same. It's not, number one, it's not recreational.
No.
Recreational and ayahuasca are not two words that belong in the same sentence.
I know. And when people say this stuff is addictive, I'm like, you don't understand. You've done this. You're like, I don't want to go near it for quite a while.
No, it's like the hardest thing you can do to make yourself do it again, you know, let alone
I know.
want to do it again. It's brutal.
Yeah. It really takes a spiritual warrior to do it. It truly does. So obviously you had been in all these difficult situations around the world and you'd faced some pretty hard stuff. So you're the right personality to kind of man up and do this.
Yeah, and I would still say that ayahuasca is probably the hardest thing I've ever done in my life.
Absolutely. 100%. Yeah. Yep. So, all right. So tell us, so you go to Florida to do this first journey. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so the first time that I went and sat with ayahuasca, she did not give me what I wanted.
That was my experience too.
She maybe gave me what I needed, but she did give me what I wanted. I drank 5 cups and I had
Crazy. Not in itself is crazy.
no discernible reaction.
Oh my God, Kemmi.
And I left that ceremony feeling disappointed, but I also felt unworthy. I didn't understand how that was even possible. And I remember pulling he's a facilitator at the church, and I pulled him aside and I said, I don't understand. Nothing happened. I don't understand. And I remember he asked me, he said, do you use a lot of marijuana or you smoke a lot of marijuana? It's like, I've
Do you know
never
what you're
smoked
talking
marijuana, ever, not once. And he said, well, what do you do for work? And I said, well, I'm retired law enforcement. He's just kind of like,
Yeah. The mind is very powerful.
it's just kind of like, yeah, we see this a lot. He's like, yeah, people in military, law enforcement, first responders, intelligence circles, you spend all these years training and compartmentalizing and learning how to not show your emotions, not be vulnerable, and the medicine requires you to be vulnerable, and so it's not unusual for it not to work the first time. And I said, well, but I feel so drawn to this. Like, I feel like ayahuasca is calling to me. Do I try it again? And he suggested that I come back and I do a 3-day retreat. I said, you might have better luck if you do a couple of consecutive ceremonies. So that's what I did. I took a couple months to kind of sit with that disappointment and think about what it was I really wanted out of the experience and why I was there. And I came back a couple months later, probably a little more humbly.
One.
You know, and that's when the walls started to come down.
The fact that you had to take 5 cups that first time, I took 2 and I didn't get anywhere that first time. And I was so frustrated because all the other people are there having these mind-blowing experiences that I'm just feeling like crap. I feel like I've drank poison and nothing's happening. And the shaman said the same thing to me. He's like, try it again. And I did. And I never got anywhere with it, even after the second time. But I've only done it twice. But it was at that retreat in Peru that a California guy actually told me, you might want to try mushrooms. They're gentler. So when I came home, I tried that. And that was a better fit for me, I think. I haven't gone back to ayahuasca because it was, and obviously, you know, going into it, it makes you sick. I mean, my friends were like, you're paying $5,000 to go puke in the jungle. Like, why would you do that?
I've heard that same thing. Yeah.
I had this feeling like terrible, like death warmed over, but I didn't have any psychedelic stuff. And I don't know. So I did with mushrooms. So I've just kind of stayed on that track. There's a part of me that's like, Am I going to go back and do that someday? Probably will.
You'll know.
Uh,
Like you said, I think these plants call. I think they call.
Yeah.
I think if you're supposed to have these experiences, you kind of know it.
Yeah, there was one of the guys on my retreat was this guy from Australia that had a really profound experience. And we were there for a week and it was 3 ceremonies. And he did one. And his first experience was big enough, powerful enough that in the sharing circle the next day, they were like, "Are you going to do another one?" And he's like, No, Grandmother Aya said I'm good. Yeah, I think everyone gets called to it at a different time. And I think everyone has a medicine that is theirs. And you clearly are so drawn to Aya. So then after that first one was unsuccessful, you go back to the retreat for 3 days. So then what happened?
Yeah. So the first ceremony of that 3-day retreat, the first thing that happened was I thought that there was a storm. Like I thought there was an actual literal storm happening, and I remember thinking, the sky was clear when I came in here. Like, how is there already like thunder and like that feeling that you can feel the pressure when a storm's coming? And at some point, I realized that the storm was happening inside of me, and then I started to hear sirens, like the kind of alarms that would go off in war zones when there's about to be things falling out of the sky and hitting the building, like the sirens going off. And I was so confused because I didn't know what the protocols were. And I was like, what am I supposed to do? I can't evacuate people. Like, I don't even know if I can stand up right now. Like, I can't get people out of here. Like, what am I supposed to do? And then I think it's just my ego was doing battle, right? There was a battle going on between my ego and ayahuasca, and eventually ayahuasca won, and the walls came down. But it was brutal. I mean, it was just like waves of raw emotion and crying and purging. And then eventually, one of the main things that I wanted out of ayahuasca, in addition to enlightenment, hearing Rogan and Graham Hancock talk about it. But the other thing that really drew me to it was Amel, and also my dad, because my dad had passed away. And I knew that both of those losses I hadn't really processed. And both of those losses I had some guilt around. With my dad, it was, could I have asked different questions at the hospital? Could I, I don't know, all the things that we ask ourselves after somebody passes. But so I knew I had some work to do with grief. But that first ceremony where I really connected, the grief that I processed was for my younger brother who had passed not long before I started this journey. And I had been so angry with him that I hadn't even recognized that I hadn't dealt with that loss.
And that had been a difficult relationship, right? Because did he go down a bad path?
Yeah, he had gone down a bad path, and he'd struggled with addiction, and he had just kind of been not the best father to his kids or son to his parents. He blamed me for being a law enforcement officer. I was responsible for, I guess, the trouble that he had with the law somehow.
Right.
So we hadn't had a relationship for quite a few years, and it had intensified after my dad passed because he had manipulated my mom on some things, and I was really unhappy with how he'd been behaving. And when he passed, I was still angry.
Yeah.
I hadn't grieved him at all. Then ayahuasca pulled that up and said, no, we're gonna deal with this.
Yeah. So that was surprising.
Yeah, it surprised me because it's probably part of the reason I hadn't connected the first time, as well as I completely put that off limits. And when you set intentions, and that was something I had in my research, that I understood that when you go into an experience like that, you should have some intentions that things that you want to address. And I had completely put that off limits.
Yeah.
Then it doesn't work that way. You don't get to have, you don't get to pick and choose what comes up.
Well, I think that's what's so powerful about it, because we don't realize what our egos are blocking. And we try to self-protect. And in a way, it's kind of nice that you can just go into this experience and just, if you're capable of surrendering, just let it do its thing. Because whatever's in there that's troubling you in your life you're gonna find it. And yeah, it may take more than one. For sure. You've done how many journeys? You've done a lot now.
Yeah, around 16.
Which is, yeah, that's wow.
It's a lot it's a lot in a short period of time. I mean, it's a lot.
But it's like peeling an onion, right? It is.
Yeah.
There's so many layers in there, and unlocking one thing can unlock another thing.
Yeah.
When your stuff about your brother came up, did you see any of the trauma or the reasons that had led him to that bad path?
In some ways, yes. My other brother and I were older and left the house while he was still somewhat young, so maybe he felt alone.
Abandoned, yeah.
And probably abandoned. And one of the biggest things that was also a surprise to me when I processed his loss was that I needed to ask his forgiveness for the way that I had handled it. You know, I'd spent all this time thinking I was the one in the right, I was setting boundaries, and I was in the right to act the way that I did towards him because he was involved in all this bad stuff. But I had to take responsibility for that, for my part of that relationship.
Yep.
And that's not something I saw coming either.
No, that's powerful. So then what else happened in that journey?
That ceremony was entirely about the loss of my brother, which is unusual to have a ceremony be entirely about one thing. Like normally multiple things will come up, or so many things that, I've had ceremonies where I'm like, oh man, I'm going to forget something, and I'm trying to make a running list in my head of things that are happening so that when it's over, I can go scribble down notes and try to remember every realization that I had during that ceremony. But that was all that was about. And then the rest of that retreat, I know they kind of run together now. I'd have to reference my book to see what happened after that. I feel like the first couple of ceremonies, though, were grief. Was definitely the emotions that I was able to process first, because I think the next one after that did have to do with Amel.
Tell me about that one. I think you were able to find some beautiful peace there.
Yeah. In that ceremony, I felt a lot of pain from others, I guess you would say, from other experiences, cases that I'd worked either as a police officer or a federal agent. Like I saw different people and faces and things that they had endured and pain that they had suffered, and I kind of felt it all as if it were mine, and just this incredible sense of sorrow. And then there was a realization that with that kind of pain, there has to be balance, and it has to be balanced with joy. And it's good to have empathy and compassion. You can't just fill up all your buckets with that. You've got to find ways to balance that with joy. And then I just started thinking of all of these joyful things, and then I saw all of my dogs I love dogs. My wife would say I have too many. I don't know if that's I'm not sure that's a thing, but all the dogs that I had lost in my life came running to me, and
I love that.
Somewhere in the temple, somebody was belching, and it just became like the funniest thing. And it was almost like a joyful, like a kid. I mean, I was a grown man, obviously, but it just sounded like a kid belching, and it was just, I just started laughing. hysterically, and then I couldn't stop, and then it's kind of contagious. It was like everyone else kind of started laughing, and the whole temple was laughing. It was pretty funny. So it was a great ceremony because it was that recognition that you have to have both of those things to be healthy. Yes, there's going to be pain. There's always going to be pain in life. You can't get away. Pain is part of our human experience, right? But sometimes when we have so much pain, we shut joy out. Like we don't even want to let it in. And that's where we start to, I think, go to dark places, when we shut down that other side of the equation.
Well, I think that's what we're seeing in humanity right now. Like we're seeing the shadow of humankind, all the pain that's in there that causes people to do terrible things. And I want the whole world to do this stuff, because if they got in there and dealt with their own trauma, then they wouldn't be doing the horrible things we're doing. I think for our viewers who have never done this type of work, you talk about the man belching. The body releases trauma in all kinds of interesting ways. That's one of them, right? You can release through laughter, vomiting. The other end, there's purging out of all ends. Sometimes your body just shakes. I think there was one point in your book where you just went outside and you started singing. Am I remembering that correctly?
Yeah, I think that was a later, it was probably a few months later. Yeah, I did. I had this primary song from when I was in church as a kid that the lyrics kind of came to me, and I started kind of humming it quietly inside the temple. And it's, you don't want to disrupt others. Like, I mean, you do know when you're in this experience, you still know, what's going on, around you, right? And so I thought, well, I had this desire to sing it, which I'm not a singer. And the funny thing about it was I had actually sung this song in front of the congregation when I was probably, 10 or 11, and I had a friend that was sitting in one of the front pews, and she started laughing at me, and I was mortified, and like, I don't think I had ever sung other than maybe in the car by myself or the shower. And so here I found myself wanting to sing this song. So I went outside, and it was a full moon, and I looked up at the moon. I sang the song. I sang it like 3 times. Yeah.
Which was a release. It's a powerful release. And it's also bringing you back to some childhood stuff. So if I can ask you, so you were adopted.
I was adopted, yeah.
And you grew up in the Mormon church.
Yes.
And you were married to a man. And then at some point in this journey, you realized you prefer women.
Yeah.
And now you're married to Aaron, right?
Yeah.
So was this during the ayahuasca that you discovered your sexuality?
No. I've been with my wife I've been married for 9 years in a couple of weeks. We met in 2014. So, yeah.
So did any of that come up for you in any of your journey? Like having been adopted and then being in the Mormon church, could that have at all impacted you staying in the closet? I'm just curious about that.
Yeah, I think subconsciously. I kind of joke about this in the book, the phrase coming out of the closet, because I don't know that I ever knew I was in the closet. I just had never considered it. And part of that probably did have to do with my Mormon upbringing. It came up for me in ceremony because my father passed away before I met Aaron and went public with that relationship. So I never really had an opportunity to know for sure if he would have accepted it. And I had some, I guess you could say, reservations. And I think the ceremonies, it made me realize that he loved me unconditionally, and he would have accepted that part of me as well, and gave me some peace with that. The adoption came up probably several times throughout ceremonies in different ways. I probably always have struggled with fear of abandonment, fear of rejection, those questions that are human nature. Well, why was I not wanted? Why was I given away? Why? Yeah, so those things came up for me in ceremony in some beautiful ways. I had a ceremony where I saw my birth mother holding me in the hospital, and then I saw my father holding me. And my father actually went to the hospital where I was born and collected me from the hospital 3 days after I was born and flew with me back to Missouri where he was going to dental school. And in that ceremony, I saw love from both of them. I saw the sacrifice and the heartbreak of a mother who did love me but knew that she couldn't properly care for me, and the joy of my father who saw me as an answer to a prayer. And I realized that that had made me feel like I had to earn that. You know, I don't think I understood until that moment, like, where my drive came from, or part of my drive to always be proving myself and always be accomplishing something. And I realized in that ceremony that that's where some of that had come from, is that I felt like I had to earn that opportunity that I was given.
Yeah, that's powerful. So many people that are adopted, I think, have similar stories that we don't realize, going back to that early time, how much impact that actually has. And of course, there's abandonment there. It's so powerful that you're able to see the love and the sacrifice of your birth mother. And you ended up having a full circle with her, right? Between the relationship.
Yeah, and I met her when I was in high school, actually, and I've kept in sporadic contact with her over the years. And I reached out to her at some point in this process. I actually sent her the book. And, well, first I called her and I told her kind of what I was up to, and we reconnected, and I told her I'd written a book, and she said she'd like to read it, and I kind of warned her, I'm like, it's kind of an unfiltered account of my life, and she's like, oh, it's the best kind. And she's done some writing in her life as well. So I sent it to her, and she read it, and she loved it, and so we've reconnected a little bit. I hope to get out and see. She lives out west. I hope to get out and see her at some point. I haven't seen her in probably, I don't know, it's probably been over 20 years.
Yeah, but it's just more love in your life, right?
Yeah.
It's so cool. I don't know if we finished the thread about Amel in the journey with her.
No, we didn't. So that was the ceremony where I had the balance between pain and joy, and she was the catalyst in that, because there was a ringtone on her phone in Iraq that she had picked for the kidnappers when they called, and I don't remember why she picked this one, but it sounded like a baby laughing.
Yeah.
So it was probably because you can't miss that. Like, you're not going to think that's someone else's phone that's going to get your attention. But I had somehow come to associate that with pain. And I had just I recognized that I had kind of shut out laughter. Like, laughter had almost become painful. And in that ceremony where I was recognizing that, and just the love that she had for Hazim and her willingness to go and sacrifice, and it all kind of came together in a very beautiful way, where all that sorrow just melted away and was replaced with that just innocent, childlike laughter that was happening in the temple at that time.
That's beautiful. Does she have a connection to your land? So tell us about the middle ground. You purchased some land in the Ozark.
Yeah, I bought some property in the Ozark Mountains. I bought it right before I started as a DS agent, and I named it the Middle Ground after a song by that same title, sung by Rick Emmett, who was one of the members of the 70s band Triumph. So I had this property, and in 2021, I think I had an opportunity to buy another little bit of land next to that I've got a cabin on. And so I've been trying to steward this land and hoping to, my long-term goal with it is to have it as a place where people can come and heal and have a nature-based retreat on it, ideally for first responders. And as part of that, I want to do a memorial garden and plant a tree for Amel on that property. Yeah, and just turn it into a place where people can come and heal in nature, just decompress, can connect with the land. And
That's beautiful. I see you doing that. So for people who've never done ayahuasca, what would your advice be for anyone who's thinking about it?
Do some homework. There's a point where you can be over-informed.
Over-prepared? Yeah.
But if somebody thinks it's something that's calling to them, I certainly would say look into it. I don't think it's for everybody. I think it's important to listen to yourself and your intuition. You have to be ready to, ayahuasca is like a mirror, and it's going to show you everything and force you to look at it, whether you want to see it or not. So you have to be ready for that and willing to take responsibility for your life. And it's not necessarily an easy thing to do, but it's a very rewarding thing to do. And I have come to believe that these plants have a way of calling to people, whether it's through that synchronicity that you mentioned or just a thought that won't leave you alone, that you keep coming back to.
I agree.
But we have to be able to listen to ourselves. And in this world that we live in, it's hard to find a moment of quiet to turn everything off and go inward and understand what your body's telling you, your mind's telling you.
My gosh, especially with modern devices. I mean, we are just distract all day long, right?
Yeah.
I'm someone who's been meditating for 20 years, so I've got that practice. But yeah, I think most people don't take that time out, and it can be scary to do it with yourself. You see things you don't want to see. I resonate when you said you have to be ready for it. Because when I first learned about ayahuasca in 2009, I knew just the intensity of it just from people that had done it, but I knew enough to know that I was not ready for it. It was another decade during a pretty serious heartbreak that I was like, okay, now's the time. Now I'm ready. And I just went for it. But I think there's that moment where you are ready, where you've suffered long enough, or you've had bad patterns, whether it's drinking. And that's such a common coping mechanism, especially with military and first responders. That theme comes up over and over. So, well, this is a good moment for me to pull up your book. I feel like the timing of this, again, not by accident, any of this, more synchronicity, because when Kemmi and I first met, you were kind of in the final stages of creating a proof, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I just read the whole thing. And I have to be honest with you, I was fighting back tears.
Thank you.
It was so well done. I was thinking, I don't want to compare it to Eat, Pray, Love because it's not at all the same kind of story. But in terms of how big it's going to be, I feel like it has that potential. Especially, I mean, the cover's amazing. I love the cover. But like the fact that you're coming from this kind of law enforcement life. And you do say in your book that even as law enforcement, you were someone that was a little more soft and open-minded about interpretation of the law. Is that an accurate description?
I remember when I went through the police academy, there was a focus on officer discretion, like understanding it's the officer's job to know the difference between the letter of the law and the intent of the law, right? Like speeding laws don't exist so that someone can't expeditiously get someone to the hospital if there's no ambulance available. Like there's extenuating circumstances where that's not the reason that the law exists, and that's officer discretion. And that was something that I prided myself on throughout my career, both as a police officer and as a federal agent. I do believe that most people who go into these professions do so because they have a desire to help their communities, and it's a hard job to do. And it's a hard job to do for a long period of time. You know, these incidents and the trauma that you see over and over and over, it takes a toll, and it can harden you. It had hardened me in ways that I didn't even understand until the walls started to come down and I was able to see how much scar tissue had built up over the years. Like you don't even necessarily realize how it's impacting you.
Yeah. You said in the book that it's improved your marriage. Right? You're an easier person to love now, I think is what you said.
I think so. I hope so.
We'll have to ask Erin that question. Right? But I was really impressed with her how supportive she's been of you on this journey, not being someone that is in this world at all.
Yeah, she's been great. Yeah, she has no interest whatsoever. I was laughing when you said your friends said, "Oh, you're gonna go, puke in the forest." I was like, "That's you're gonna go puke in the woods." Yeah, that sounds great. No thanks. But I couldn't have asked for a more supportive partner. She's been fantastic.
Yeah, that's amazing. So when does the book come out?
So hopefully in March. Yeah, it's done. The manuscript is completely done. The cover is done. So now it's just ordering proofs and making sure that it's, it looks good when it's actually in your hands. So it should be out very soon, within the next
As someone who
month.
has also published, I just have to say this book is seriously well done. Like
Thank you.
I'm really impressed, very impressed. It's just such a powerful journey, and it's going to make such a difference with anybody that reads it, but certainly first responders, which I know is your goal, which leads me now to Nona's way. So I'll start by saying that this is about the Camino de Santiago in Spain. And I have a personal connection to this, to just a little more synchronicity, because I lived in Spain during college. So it's always been my dream to walk the Camino. I have many friends that have done it many times.
Oh, come on, let's go. We start April 26th.
I know. God, if I didn't have an old geriatric cat, I would be with you. How did this come about for you?
I wanted to walk the Camino when I retired. I had surgery on my foot a couple months before I retired, and so I couldn't do that. Which, things happen for a reason. I may not have ended up on the journey that I ended up with Ayahuasca if I had done the Camino when I retired. So, maybe that was meant to unfold that way. But anyway, so I'm living in Brussels now with my wife, and decided that I would do that while I was here, relatively close to Spain, or closer. And as I was working on the book and thinking more about mental health and the first responder community and the path that we just talked about, as we said, it's not a path for everyone, but everyone needs mental health.
Yep.
And this kind of came about just as I was sitting on the back porch with my dog, Nona, who is half Pyrenees and half coonhound. And the French route of the Camino starts in the Pyrenees Mountains. And it just kind of occurred to me, like, wouldn't it be neat to walk the Camino with Nona in the Pyrenees, take her back to her ancestral roots? And one thing led to another, and now I have Nona's Way, which we're doing as an awareness walk for mental health and trauma recovery in the first responder community. We're gonna arrive in Saint-Jean-Pied-de-Port in France on April 24th, and we will start walking 780 kilometers to Santiago de Compostela starting on April 26th. And we have the website up and running, and there's a place on there where folks can go to submit a name or a message for someone that has lost the battle to suicide, or they can send a department patch, and any of those that we receive we will carry with us on our journey just to honor those.
I love it. It's so beautiful.
Thank you.
And if anyone wants to contribute, you can do so. Please do. This is such a great cause.
Thank you.
How long are you planning to take? I know people can do anywhere from like 4 weeks to 2 months. What are you thinking?
I'm budgeting about 6 weeks.
Yeah. Okay. That sounds right.
If we can do it a little bit quicker, I'd like to go all the way to the sea there, which is another 3 or 4 days past Santiago de Compostela. So it just kind of depends how we do. We're doing some training and upping our distances. I get wore out way before Nona. She's usually just, she's upset usually that I'm not going fast enough, and then she comes home and runs around the yard. She's a year and a half.
Oh, she's still young. Perfect.
Yeah, she has an Instagram as well, Nona's Way. That's like Nona's _way. And it's usually just kind of fun videos of her doing stuff like blowing bubbles in the water. But once we start the Camino, I'll be posting updates on that.
Oh, it's awesome. It's what we need to, we all need to be watching positive things right now. There's so much negativity and darkness in the world. Oh my goodness. Well, this is so cool. It's so awesome talking to you. I'm so glad I found you. You found me. And this is what's been happening since I started this podcast, just synchronicity. Like one person leads to the next person. And oh, I know that person. we both have this connection to the Camino de Santiago.
I heard somebody say once, and I've never forgot it, that no force on earth can stop an idea that's time has come. And I feel like that's kind of where we are with this movement. I just think it's gaining momentum, and people are starting to see the truth and the power of these plants. And
yeah, I agree.
maybe the plants have something to do with that. You know, maybe this is Mother Nature's way of smacking us upside the head.
Oh yeah, I mean, clearly we're out of balance with her. I've always felt that since I started doing this work, that the plants have so much wisdom, and they really are making themselves known. And it's amazing that it's been on mainstream news. It's been on 60 Minutes. Anderson Cooper's talked about it. The veterans are definitely having a huge part in that, which is just beautiful to see. So your story is really powerful. It's going to help a lot of people. I know we barely scratched the surface of what you've experienced, but it's why everyone should read your book.
Thank you. And if I could say one other thing about that, on the website for the book, which is kalesadler.com, you can sign up for the newsletter, and when it does launch, it's going to be available for a free download for the first couple of days. So if you sign up there, you'll get a notification when it launches, and you'll have an opportunity to download it for free.
Yeah, and you won't stop reading it. I'm a very lazy reader. I'm famous for being in the middle of 5 books at any given time. A little ADHD. But I couldn't stop reading it. Seriously, it was really breathtaking. It's beautiful.
That's great to hear. I appreciate that. I hope people enjoy it, and I hope it can help.
Yep, it's going to make a difference. And I see very clearly your little healing sanctuary in the middle ground down the road. I can visualize it, you helping people there. So you are a beautiful soul, Kemmi.
Thank you.
It's been such an honor to meet you, and I can't wait to follow your journey on the Camino with Nona. We will definitely stay in touch.
Sounds great. I look forward to it. Thanks so much for having me on.
All right. Yeah, thanks for coming. Take care.